But they're really good stories if you want to read it. Thank you. So that's for you.
Before we begin, students, there will be no videotaping or filming. We're doing that with our broadcasting group. So I ask you at this time to go ahead and put your phones on silence, airplane mode. Also, please make sure we don't have any earbuds, any pods in our ears so we can pay full attention. We have a very special occasion to get to do this. We're very blessed to have the opportunity to have somebody come in here and speak to us. So please give them your full attention and respect. I'm going to introduce our student speaker at this time. Wes Kleinman is going to come up here and introduce our speaker.
Good morning. My name is Wes. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a wonderful opportunity to hear from Louisa Lawrence Israel. It is one thing to read or watch about the Holocaust, but it's another experience opportunity such as this one today. I would like to thank the Congregation House of Israel Sisterhood, the Joanne Riegler Holocaust Education Fund, and to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Thank you.
So much light in my face that I can't see any of you, so hopefully it gets a little
better. You just heard my name, Louisa Lawrence Israels. I'm a survivor volunteer at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I've been there as a volunteer for already 25 years. The museum is 26 years old. But I didn't know. I was born Louisa Israels, but I didn't know that till I was about 3 years old. When I started speaking and people called me by name, they called me Maria. And that was done during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands to keep me safe. My parents were able to get fake identity papers for my brother and myself. And we had different names, and we were never told what our real names were till the occupation and the war was over. I was born in 1942. So you can all do the math and figure out how old I am. And when our country, the Netherlands, and I like to call it Holland because the Netherlands is hard for me to pronounce. I wasn't brought up with English. So when Holland was already occupied almost 2 years. And I say occupied.
Right. I'm going to go back a little bit because I want to show you some slides and a map of Holland. First slide that you see is not very interesting, but it has the website of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum on it, ushmm.org. When I'm finished today and you go home and you think about what I told you, you might have a lot more questions that didn't come up right away. A lot of your questions can be answered. You can find the answers on our website. The website is important. It gives you history, but it also gives you what is happening today. Genocide never stopped. We have what we call contemporary genocide, and we address that at the Holocaust Memorial Museum website because we want people to be aware of it. And I will go and I'll talk about that towards the end of my talk today a little bit more. So, the dark area that you see on the slide is actually 3 countries. In the north, it's the Netherlands or Holland. You see the pink indicator indicates to our capital, Amsterdam. You see a dark line if you go down, and that is the border with Belgium. Then you go a little bit to your right and down, and you see another, like a horizontal dark line, and that's the border between Belgium and Luxembourg. 3 countries together are often referred to as the Benelux countries. So to the right of the dark area, that's Germany. You see what a long border Germany and Holland and Belgium and Luxembourg really have. To the south of Belgium is France, Then you have that blue area that is part of the Atlantic Ocean, the North Sea. And then you have an island on the left, and that's England, or the UK. All these countries were part of the occupation and the war in Western Europe. Most of what you read or hear talks about Poland, or Czechoslovakia, or Romania, or Hungary. That's Eastern Europe. Western Europe was very much involved and occupied by the Germans. Because what they really wanted, can you not use flash? Because I have already one strong light and another light kind of distracts me. Thank you. So, Germany, or the Nazis, wanted to conquer the world. They started with Europe. But they had much further plans. They really wanted the United States, they wanted Canada, and they wanted South America too. I don't think they even thought about Australia yet. But they needed harbors because everything was not moved by plane. Transport planes weren't as big at that time as they are today. So they needed ships, and they needed harbors. And Holland, being on the Atlantic Ocean, had the harbors. And that was one of the reasons that the Germans, what were originally the friends of the people in Holland, decided that they wanted to occupy Holland. When the Nazis came into Holland in May 1940, the Dutch army fought for 4 days. After the 4th day of fighting and losing a lot of lives,
the Nazis bombed the main harbor in the Netherlands, Rotterdam. And the threat was, if you don't stop fighting, don't give up, then we will bomb The Hague, where was the seat of our government, or still the seat of our government, and our capital, Amsterdam. So the Dutch army stopped fighting. We gave up. Our queen and her government fled to London, to England, where they stayed for the duration of the occupation. And all the Dutch people had 5 long years of Nazi occupation. Holland, as a country, went away. We were annexed to Germany. We were part of Germany. So you can imagine the Dutch people weren't very happy. If you think about it, we are in the United States. Our neighbor in the north is Canada. And Canada decides they're going to take over the United States. So all of a sudden, from being an American, having an American president, an American government, we are ruled by Canada. People are not happy about that. They want to stay American. You have no more rights to vote. You can't buy anything because it's decided by another country what you can buy because they want most. Like the Nazis wanted most of all the good things in our stores. And there was very little left for the Dutch people. The Nazis had to live somewhere, and it was not like today where you have so many hotels and motels. We didn't have that. We had in the big cities, we had some hotels, but the Nazis that were occupying Holland had to live all over the place. So they used to walk around in the street, look up at the houses if they found a nice house. If they were polite, they would knock on the door. If they were not polite, they would kick in the door. They look inside and they tell the people that lived in that house, you can live in the basement, we'll take over the rest of your house. Basements in Holland are not finished basements like they have in the United States. They're storage areas and they're cold and there's usually no heat. So you can imagine the Dutch people weren't very happy. That was the beginning. Then the Nazis got settled. They made rules and regulations for everybody. Food was rationed for all Dutch people. And then they started on the targeted groups. And the Nazis, starting in Germany in 1933, had different groups that they didn't like, and I call them targeted groups, because they made their life very hard, and then at a certain point they wanted to get rid of all the people. The largest group that was targeted by them were Jews. Then there were Roma people, what we used to call gypsies. Then they had homosexuals, communists, socialists, mentally and physically impaired people, because They were not good to the society. And there were a lot of other groups that were targeted, but the largest group were Jews. So the Nazis got settled, and then they decided in Holland, we got to do something. We had a lot of Jewish families in Holland. It's a very small country. It's about the size of New Jersey. But we had Roma people, but they lived in Roma or gypsy camps. They were not assimilated in the whole country. So to get rid of the Roma people, they just went into the camps, emptied the camps, and either killed the people or sent them, when they started deportations to the east, to a concentration camp. For Jews, that was more difficult because for 500 years, Jews had lived in Holland. Holland was a very tolerant country. It didn't matter what religion you have. And people were actually integrated. They lived in the whole country. The largest community was our capital, Amsterdam. And I was born in the town of Haarlem, but it's very close to Amsterdam. And we had a very large Jewish community too. The rest of the country, it was 3 or 4 families in towns. So it was a little harder for the Nazis to figure out how they were going to concentrate people, and then when they were ready to deport them to the death camps, to do that. But first they had rules and regulations. So they made our lives, I'm Jewish, oops, I'm sorry. They made our lives from a big life, assimilated life, being able to participate in everything in the country, they made it smaller and smaller. They took slowly everything away from us, and our freedom too. So it started with Jews could not walk in a park. You could only walk on one side of the street. You could not sit on a bench. You could not use public transportation. Jewish children could not go to a public school. You could only be taught by Jewish teachers. If you were sick, you could only go to a Jewish doctor. What wasn't so difficult in Amsterdam or the town of Haarlem, where I'm from, because we had big Jewish communities. But in the smaller towns, there are no Jewish hospitals, no Jewish doctors. So life was made very difficult. We had the targeted groups, and then you had the people in Holland, and we had also different groups there. We had people that actually loved the Nazi occupation. They thought, we're now part of Germany. If we help the Nazis, we get the better jobs, we get better food. And they were called collaborators. They also denounced or betrayed Jewish families. They betrayed people that were in the resistance. And there was an incentive for them to do that. They got actually paid. If they found somebody who was Jewish and they thought that person was doing something wrong, they would run to Nazi headquarters. They would get equivalent to $25 because there was an incentive to betray a Jewish family. And they went on to the next person. So those were the really nasty people. Then you had the people that were persecuted, and I already told you those groups. And I told you that the largest group in Holland were the Jewish families and Jews. And then you had what I call the heroes. And I always have to talk about them because if it hadn't been for those heroes, I wouldn't be here today. I had amazing parents that did anything in their power to keep their children safe, but they could never have done that alone. The heroes were part of the people that joined the resistance against the Nazi rules. And they did anything that they could to help people that needed help, like we were. They did that risking their lives, or sometimes the lives of their wives and family, or their husbands and family too. Some of them were young students that were pretty gung-ho, and they said, you know, we don't like this Nazi occupation, we're going to do anything that we can to help people. These young students formed also a separate network, and they saved a lot of children. Even when families were picked up by the Nazis, put in holding areas before there was room on the trains to deport them, and then the parents and the children were usually separated. They put the children in a temporary daycare center. these students smuggled children out of the daycare centers, found hiding places for them, and I think that our student group of the resistance saved over 800 children. You think, well, what is 800 children? It's 800 lives. That was really important. So we had these different groups, and life, I told you, was more and more restricted for Jews. Also, my father, who was in business with his father, he had a textile firm. He made clothing, so he had factories, and then he had a chain of stores where he sold the clothing. It was a Jewish company or firm, so the company was confiscated by the Nazis and then taken over by the Nazis. Jews were not allowed to have any property. So to make, my parents had a son, my older brother, and then I was on the way. So my father had to make a living, and from running a big company and having a doctorate in economics, he finally found a very small job as a pants presser in a Jewish dry cleaning, very small dry cleaning place. Men's pants he was pressing. So since he couldn't use public transportation and his bicycle was confiscated, he had to walk 5 miles to work in the morning and 5 miles back home. I asked him, not so long before he passed away, how that made him feel. One big difference, nice office, and then in a very smelly dry cleaning place where he worked. And he said it didn't make any difference. The most important part was that you could feed your family. So you could have all the money in the world on one hand and be very spoiled. And that could be taken away from you, but then you still had to feed your family. So making a very little money every week, he could buy milk and bread for us. And that was important, so he didn't care where he worked. So as restricted as our life was, also property had to be handed in for Jewish families. You couldn't have bank books, cash, jewelry, gold, silver, copper, tin. You couldn't have a bicycle, you couldn't have a camera, anything that was worth money, you could not have. But still, we lived in a house, tiny little house that my parents had rented, and the next morning came, and we made it till the next day. We as children never knew how afraid my parents were, because they were always afraid, what's the new rule? What's going to happen tomorrow? But they were happy to wake up, and then there was another day, till I was about 6 months old. Then everything drastically changed. The death camps in Poland were up and running, and the Nazis started deportation of Jews to the death camps in Poland. First, I'm only talking about Holland. Every country had very similar Nazi rules, but they were always a little bit different for each country, depending on who was ruling that country. So in Holland, every Jewish person above the age of 6 was ordered to wear a bright yellow star with the word Jew written in the middle of it. I made a copy of my father's star. It's the exact color and the exact size. And I'll put it on for a second because I don't really like to do that. And I show you what that looked like. You could not leave your house with having that star on your clothes. I hope you can all see it. I will take it off as quickly as I put it on because I don't like it. And I'll tell you why. Holland is very tolerant about religion. If I were part of your class and we lived all together around 1942, you might have known that I was Jewish, but nobody really cared. If you were Christian, there were very few Muslims at that time, but there were some, or you were Jewish, didn't make any difference. We were all part of the same school, and we were all the same, and that's the way it's supposed to be, even today. But now, you saw me walking with this star, and the word Jew, Yod, written in the middle of it. So walking on the street, walking with your friends, you might say, did you know that she was Jewish? And the other one would say, who cares? But there might be somebody that says, I didn't know she was a dirty Jew, because that's what we were called. But what was even worse, you could hurt me. You could throw a rock at me. You could make me trip, and I would have no place to go to complain. If I went to the police or to Nazi headquarters, they would say, you're just a dirty Jew, you deserve it, or they would give me another beating. That was the difference, wearing that star, that all of a sudden you were kind of a sitting duck. People always ask, so why did people wear it? Why didn't you just go outside your door and not wear that star? The problem at that time was that you didn't know who you could trust. You could have a very friendly neighbor that you lived next to and you invited. You know, we celebrate Hanukkah, they celebrate Christmas, you invite each other for the holidays, you borrow a cup of sugar from them if you need it, and you were friendly, you said good morning every morning. That person could have turned collaborator, and you wouldn't know, because people didn't say. You only found out after they had done something really bad, if they were collaborators or not. So if they saw you, so somebody had turned, your neighbor had turned collaborator, and they saw you walking around without a star, they could run to Nazi headquarters, and they could betray you and say, we saw a Jew walking on the street without a star. That collaborator would get money, and they could come for us, send us on an early deportation, throw us in jail, or give us a good beating. You didn't know, so that's why you wore that star. Also, around the same time that we had to start wearing that star, my brother and I didn't wear one because we weren't 6 yet. We had orders to move to Amsterdam. What the Nazis were trying to do is concentrate most of the Jews in our coastal region, because the Atlantic Ocean was right by where we lived, and that would make it easier for them. They wouldn't have to go all over the country and find out where Jews lived. They had everybody in Amsterdam. They could go street by street, ring every doorbell or kick every door in and find out if Jews were living there or hiding in Amsterdam, and put them on a train and deport them to the death camps in Poland. When the orders came for us to move to Amsterdam, my parents didn't take it as seriously as they probably should have. My father said, I have no place to live in Amsterdam, so why don't we just stay here in Haarlem for a little bit longer? The resistance, the heroes, or we actually call them the underground, because nobody really knew who they were unless they helped you. It's a very quiet group that silently did all this stuff to help people. The resistance decided to make it harder for the Nazis to find out where Jews lived or the addresses of Jewish families. And what they did was they burned the records. In Holland, thanks to Napoleon 150 years before, when you were born, your father had to register your birth within 24 hours with your name, your address, and your religion. It's not like that anymore. You don't have to give a religion if you don't want to, but at that time you still had to. So burning all the records made it harder for the Nazis to find out where Jews lived. So when they burned actually the whole building, the record building in the town of Haarlem, you can imagine the next morning Nazis weren't very happy. So as a punishment, they took the 10 most prominent Jewish men from the town of Haarlem, the congregation of Haarlem, and they shot them in front of the population. Just in time, around 11 o'clock in the main square in Haarlem, when mothers were doing their meager shoppings with their children so that everybody could see that these men were being shot and killed. So the 2 rabbis, the 2 cantors, 5 board members, and our neighbor across the street, who was the president of the congregation, the Jewish congregation. They were all shot and killed. We were really good friends with the family across the street from us. We were kind of liberal Jews, very assimilated. Holidays were important, but we weren't very religious in my family. And my parents, my grandparents were Orthodox. But the family across the street was very Orthodox. It was a fairly large house. So the father was the president of the congregation, and he lived in the house with his wife, 7 children, his parents, and 2 unmarried aunts. And the children, I say children, but they were really adults, because they were all my parents' age, around 30. And none of the children worked, because they were Jewish, and they were fired. They were teachers, they were nurses, some of them were stockbrokers, but none of them could work anymore because they were Jewish. So my mom was especially friendly with one of the daughters, who was her age, and her name was Selma. And since Selma had no job and she was not married, she was engaged but not married, she helped my mom quite often with my brother and myself, just as an extra hand. All she had to do was cross the street. So the father is shot and killed. A couple of days after Selma's dad was killed, a large truck stopped in front of her house. People jumped off the truck, screaming. They were collaborators. They kicked open her front door, and they rounded up everybody that was in their house. So 6 siblings, her mom, grandparents, her aunts, and a couple of cousins that were visiting. The truck drove away, and Selma saw it all from one of our windows. And one brother later escaped, and the rest of the family she never saw again. They were sent to the largest death camp in Poland, Auschwitz, where they were murdered. That same night we moved to Amsterdam, because my father was really afraid. Maybe the next truck will stop in front of our house. He had really good friends in Amsterdam, and they were part of the resistance. Most of them had been in the military, and my father had been in the military. He was mobilized in the beginning of the war, and they had all been taken prisoner of war into Germany, my father too. But then when Holland stopped fighting, about 6 weeks later, they let all these military people go back to Holland. We were part of Germany, we didn't have an army anymore, and they needed the barracks for other people, and they let the Dutch people go back home. That's how my father came back home. But these people that my father had been in the military with, most of them joined the resistance. They knew where my dad was, and they offered help. And with their help, my father found a hiding place. So what he found was a storage attic on top of a set of Amsterdam row houses. So I showed our daughters where we were. I didn't go inside. I've never been back inside that attic. But I showed them the street where it was in Amsterdam, and I took a picture of it. So in the picture, you actually see colorful cars. So it's a contemporary picture. Those cars weren't there, but the buildings still look 700 years the same way. So I'll share that with you. It's a set of row houses, and again, you see a pink indicator, what indicates to the storage attic all the way on top. We had a tiny little dormer window, so the place wasn't very well lit. And there was stored in there a table and chairs, a pretty broken down couch, and a cupboard with some stuff in it. I don't really remember what, and I don't even remember if we used some of that stuff. So it was important to bring in the right things, because you go into hiding and you stay there till it's safe for you to come out. So you couldn't go back and forth and say, I've forgotten something, maybe something little, and then the resistance, one of the heroes, will bring it over. Or my father also knew that he would have to go out after curfew, sometimes a couple of times a week. Curfew always was when it was dark. because he had to contact people from the resistance to try to get food for us and medicine when we were sick. And what was also very important, believe it today with the television and your iPhone and all the other ways that you, in the internet, that you can get news, but we didn't have news. We didn't have newspapers, of course, no telephone, radio was forbidden, so we had no idea in that attic what was going on in the outside world. And news sometimes can give you hope. If you know what is happening, you can plan a little bit. So that's what my father did. So what they decided to bring into the attic was a place to sleep on. So for my 3 adults and my brother, so it was Mom, Dad, Selma, my mom's friend, who stayed with us for the duration, and my brother, who was 2 years old. They brought in a mattress to sleep on. They had a crib for me that they brought in because I was only 6 months old. There was no kitchen. There was a small toilet and a small sink with cold running water, no bathroom with a shower or a bathtub. So if there was anything to cook, my mom needed something to cook on, so she brought in a camping stove, 2 oil lamps just in case the electricity would go off. And they brought in as many blankets as they could, and this was all with the help of the resistance. Everything in our house, the resistance took out and stored it for us, and most of the things that were in our house were given back to us at the end of the war. And that wasn't in all countries. Like in Poland, people went back, and a lot of their neighbors had taken their stuff and said, no, it's not yours, you can't have it back. In Holland, that was a little bit different, and we were very, very lucky. So also as many clothes, and especially warm clothes, my mom and Selma, besides sewing all the time, they were also knitting. They were ripping up, if I can call it that, their old sweaters to make more wool, and then were knitting sweaters for my brother and myself to keep us warm. We were right under the roof, and it was not an insulated roof or attic. So in the wintertime, it was really bitter, bitter cold. So we went in one night. I'm sure I was carried up because I was 6 months, and my brother, whatever, he was carried up or he crawled up, I don't know. And then we stayed in that attic for almost 3 years because the occupation lasted another 3 years. If my father could not go out to get food, sometimes he was warned by people from the resistance, don't go out, there are roundups in your area and you don't want to get caught, so don't go out. We will warn you when it's safe again. So we had 3 people that were in the resistance that actually took care of us. And somebody from the resistance would come over and tell my father, you can go out again. But they also came to look if we were still there. We could have been betrayed, or if we really needed something very badly right away. So they were really unbelievable and amazing people. One time, my brother and I got, that was really the last winter, we got whooping cough and we got measles. There was no vaccinations at that time, and there was also no penicillin. So we had high fever, and my parents were really scared. And through somebody in the resistance, we had a house call from a pediatrician. It was not a Jewish pediatrician, but somebody in the resistance who decided people need help, and he made house calls. So he reassured my parents that we were going to get better, and whatever medicine he had, he gave us, and we did get better. But again, to show you how dangerous it was what he did, the pediatrician. He was denounced by a collaborator for helping Jews. And he and his partner were deported to concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. His partner was shot, and he was so severely beaten that he could never practice anymore after he came back. So that was what happened to people that decided to help other people if they were denounced. My parents kept us busy First of all, they never told us, my brother and myself, what happened in the outside world. They never talked about any of the relatives, our grandparents or aunts and uncles or cousins. And they didn't tell us that they were afraid. They were afraid all the time because they were afraid of what was happening to their family, but they were mostly afraid because they wanted to keep their 2 children safe. And they wanted us to be happy children. And they kind of succeeded, but I'll share that with you in a second. But they also had to keep us busy. And you cannot imagine, we live in a world that you go to school, you have your friends. After school, a lot of you have sports. You go home, you have electronic games, you have your cell phones, you have your computer, you have your television, you go to the movies, you have parties. You keep busy. So what do you do with 2 children when you have none of that? My parents came up with a solution. They brought in a lot of scrap paper. They brought in color pencils, crayons, regular pencils, and they taught us colors. They played games like you do with little children. I don't know if they still do them, but we did them with our children in the car, you know. The first person that have seen red cars, you know, the games that you can play with colors. Then they told us letters, words, of course in the beginning small words, and then also numbers and some easy math. It's all a form of homeschooling. And that's really what we did all day. We sat around a table, Mom and Selma was sewing or knitting, and in the meantime they were teaching us all these things. When we were liberated, I was 3 years old and I could read. You guys are much smarter than I am. It's not because I'm smart, but that's all we did. So you repeat it the next day and the next day and the next day, it sinks in, and you know, but that's because there are no other distractions. I don't remember my parents really laughing. We didn't realize, because their faces never really changed, that they were worried all the time. There was very little food. We were most of the time hungry. In the winters we were cold, but it was normal. It was never addressed by my parents that, oh, we're so sorry that we don't have a heater, or we're so sorry that we can't feed you right now. It wasn't talked about, so it was normal for us, but we did know, my brother and myself, that there was something to eat for us every day. My parents always saved something. There were times before we went to bed that my brother and I shared half of a cracker, but it was something in our stomach. Also, if there was very little food, we started the morning with a bowl of warm water. My mom heated the water on top of the camping stove. So warm water is one of the best kept secrets. If you're hungry and you have nothing else and you can get a hold of warm water, it settles your stomach for a couple of hours and you forget that you're hungry. After that, you're hungry again. So we started with a bowl of warm water. If it was cold in the winter, we were allowed to put our hands around the bowl, what would be nice because it would warm our hands. But if my mom really wanted to keep us busy for a while, she would make us ladle that warm water, like soup, and slowly eat a bowl of warm water. It sounds crazy, but those were things that they came up with to keep us busy and to keep us happy so we wouldn't cry that we were hungry. We cried very little because we had 3 adults. So if somebody, my brother or I started crying, there were always 3 adults. One of them would grab us and comfort us. So the crying never lasted a long time. Also, my parents never raised their voice to us. How do children know how to scream? Because somebody screamed at them or they heard somebody scream. We didn't hear it. So we never talked with a very loud voice, or we never screamed. Life kind of went on that way, always the same, but like I said, I didn't know any better, so it was fine for my brother and myself. My brother also took very good care of me. He was told when we went into the attic, you take care of your sister. Whatever happens, don't let anybody separate you. You have a sister and you have to take care of her. So most of the time when we were not sitting around the table, we walked around hand in hand. And my brother always had his one toy that he was allowed to bring into hiding, and that was a little wooden pull horse. So he used to hold my hand with one hand, and the other hand he used to pull that little horse. I was allowed to look at it, at his horse, but I was never allowed to touch it. That was his toy. My parents are pretty strict. So then came June 1944. And my father came home, and my brother said to my father, my brother was 4 years old, he said, "What happened? You went outside, but your face looks differently." So my father came home, and he had gotten really good news, and he had become more hopeful, because it was like a drag. Every day is the same thing, but the insecurity, we could be betrayed. If he went outside, he could have been followed by a collaborator. You never know what the next moment will bring. But my father became hopeful because the Allied army had landed in Normandy. Normandy is part of France, and I showed you on the map. I'll get the map up in a second again, but I showed you that was south of Belgium. So the Allied army was Americans, Canadians, British. There was a Jewish brigade from Palestine. Israel didn't exist at that time yet. There were free Poles, free Russians, anybody that was young and capable joined the Allied army. So they landed in Normandy, and of course the Nazis weren't very happy about it and tried to fight them. So with tremendous losses, they formed that army again after they came, by those special boats from England and landed at the beaches of Normandy. And they formed the army again, and they started liberating Europe. And this was Western Europe. Eastern Europe was liberated by the Russian army. So my father was hopeful that we would make it. If the army would move fast, we would make it. He wanted to celebrate that special moment, and they picked my second birthday. And they needed some time to plan this celebration. So my dad talked to one of his friends in the resistance, asked for some ingredients to make a birthday cake that he actually made on top of a camping stove. And he told his friend what he was planning. So my mom cut up a blouse and made a birthday dress for me. Selma, out of old rags, made a doll, like a Raggedy Ann doll for me. It was going to be my first doll. And my brother wrapped his pull horse, and he was going to give it to me as a present for my birthday, because he was in on the planning. When my father told his friends that, his one friend said, "I will come over on the day, and I will take a picture of the birthday girl." Since I didn't have socks and shoes, he brought socks and shoes of his own daughter. The shoes were a little bit too small, but for the picture, they kind of put my feet in them. And he also gave my dad a small wicker chair, a doll's chair. He said she's going to have her first doll, so maybe she can play house. The chair was already 150 years old. It was a real antique. So on my birthday, it was really very special, especially a new dress, but my best present really was my brother's pull horse. But my brother did say it was just for the day. He wanted it back at night. But, it was just very special. So my father's friends took the picture, and then, of course, he had to take the camera and the film back with him. He couldn't leave anything. We were not allowed to have property. If we had been betrayed and they had found a contemporary picture or a camera or anything like that, the Nazis would have known that somebody had helped us, so that could have started something. So they took the film with him, and he said, if she survives, I'll make sure that she'll have that picture. So I'll share it with you because I'm here. And before I share it with you, I want to tell you that I much later realized that the picture is a tribute to my parents, because my parents succeeded. They were worried. They didn't know what to expect. But we were two happy children. We didn't know the outside world. We lived in a fairly dark attic. We thought it was normal. We had our parents with us, and we were happy children. So they actually succeeded in what they wanted for us. So I'll share it with you. I was so little, I was 2 years old, that I actually fit to sit in that little doll's chair. You can just see it a little bit. And you see my brother's pull horse by my feet, and my doll. I wasn't as interested in a doll as I was in the pull horse. But it was a very happy day. I'll click one more, and you can actually see what that chair looks like. That's what the chair looks like, and it's really little. And it's very fragile now because we weren't so careful with it. And we decided to give it to the Holocaust Museum. And occasionally they put it on display. Sometimes it's in their storage, and they pull it out for special occasions. Because there are not that many artifacts of little children from when they were in hiding. So my dad was right. The army got together, and they started liberating northern France. That is that white area south of Belgium. They liberated Paris, and they liberated western Belgium, and they came to Holland in the middle of September 1944. So that's only 3 months after they landed in Normandy, and they were fighting off, of course, fighting the Nazis. It wasn't just move, they really had to get there by fighting. They liberated the southern part of Holland, and then they came, you see underneath the indicator, you see 3 horizontal blue lines. Those are the big rivers that run through Holland. The biggest river is the Rhine River. And those rivers run into a delta, and the harbor of Rotterdam is part of it, and then it goes into the Atlantic Ocean. So when the Allied army came to the big rivers, we had what was very unusual, an early onset of a very severe winter. And in mid-September, the rivers were already frozen. Normally that's by December or January. It's never that early. But this was, I think, the most severe winter ever in Northern Europe. So the Allied army did not have the right equipment to cross 3 rivers. You know, a bridge they couldn't use because the first thing the Nazis would do is blow up the bridge. So there was special equipment they needed. Maybe 1 river they could have crossed, but not 3. So here you have mid-September, the southern part of Holland is liberated. People are happy. Very slowly, food supplies are coming through. Normally when a war is over, the food supplies can cross a border. That happens all over the world. It is very slow, but there is food coming in, so they're eating again. While we in the north are completely closed off. It's a cold winter. The winter crops were frozen because the winter started too early, and there's no food coming in. It's called in Holland the hunger winter. And it's not just people that were in hiding, everybody was hungry and everybody was cold. Now the people that were not in hiding were able to, against the Nazi law, but they did it at night, they chopped down trees to make fires in their fireplaces or in their stoves that they had in their houses, to heat their houses. Anything that was wood they would burn. They would even take frames from their doors and their windows. So you can imagine after the war was over what the houses looked like in Holland. It was one big dilapidated mess and no trees. But we couldn't do that in the attic. So life became even tougher than it was before. When the southern part of Holland was liberated, my father did ask people from the resistance to bring him as much flour, butter, and sugar. And he baked butter cookies. And he sealed them in tins that his friends had saved for him. And that was emergency food. If there was nothing else to be had, then my brother and I would share half of a cookie. So much butter in those cookies that it would keep you for a little bit. Adults would go without for as long as they could. My mom and her friend Selma played this silly game. One would ask the other, "Are you hungry?" And the other one would answer, "I don't know how you could ask, I'm so full." We just shared this big bowl of strawberries with whipped cream. So we as children hearing this, wonder, what is a strawberry? We'd never seen one. Did they eat? No, they didn't. But that's what they were telling each other, and then they got through a couple of more hours being hungry because they were dreaming about these strawberries with whipped cream. They did all kinds of stuff to kind of distract themselves from being hungry. We were so cold that our hands and feet actually hurt. And my brother and I did a lot of crying, softly, but we cried because we were in such pain. We had a condition what is called chilblains. Still happens today, but today and even around that time, but it was not for us anymore, my father couldn't get the cream to put on our hands, what would take the pain away. But he did remember, and I'm sharing a disgusting, yucky story, but we as children did not know it was disgusting and yucky. My father remembered that farmers in the 30s, when they had in the winter to go and feed their livestock, or they had to go to the field, they had chilblains and they were in pain, but they knew exactly what to do. They put their hands and feet in cow or horse's urine. The uric acid in urine is the same that is in the cream that they manufacture to put on you when you're in such pain. So since we didn't have horses or cows upstairs in our attic, what my father made us do is pee in a potty at night, put our hands and feet in our own pee-pee. Pain would go away and we would go and fall asleep without pain. So if nobody tells you that it's disgusting, it was normal, it took the pain away. So now I realize really what it was like, but that's because somebody told me when I grew up that it was not good. There were a lot of things that happened in that last winter, but I have to pick and choose kind of what I'm telling you because I can't sit here till 6 o'clock and you would all be sick of me anyway. So I have to jump a little bit. We were liberated in May 1945. As soon as the rivers thawed, the Canadian Army that had stayed by the rivers to watch when they could cross, they crossed the rivers and they liberated the northern part of Holland. How did my father find out? He heard so much noise and singing on the street. And he opened for the first time that dormer window and he looked outside and he said to us, "I think it's really over. I think we're free." So 2 children that I never told anything, we didn't know what he was talking about. They tried to explain it to us, but was even better. My father was hungry. I told you already, he was always hungry. So miraculously, 1 tin of cookies was saved. He unsealed it. I don't know how that happened, but there was 1 tin of cookies left. He unsealed it and he stuffed his face and he put the tin on the table and he said, "Everybody can take as many cookies as they want." He knew that we would get food again. Supply lines would open since we were free. So 1 cookie and we were full. But it was the first time we had a whole cookie. So my brother actually said, "It's wonderful to be free because it means eating cookies." We just had no concept of what it meant. My parents waited a couple of days. They explained everything to us. I changed names. They explained to me that my real name was Louisa and my last name was Israels and no more Maria. But after they decided that we were really free, my father said, "We're going to go outside and we're going to play in the park." We've lived across the street from a park for 3 years and now you can actually play in a park. We had no idea what that meant. when people ask me what was the hardest thing that I really remember from those days of occupation, I remember my birthday, but the hardest thing for us was when my father made us follow him down 4 flights of stairs, and he opened the front door. So my brother and I are holding on for dear life to each other because we don't know what to expect. And my father opens the front door, and it's this very sunny spring day, and there's all that light. It blinded us, and that's scary for a little child. But what was even scarier was that there were no more walls. We had a small attic. We had lived there for almost 3 years, and now everything is unending. It didn't make us feel safe, and my brother started crying. I mimicked everything that he did, and I started crying, and my brother said, if this is what it means to be free, I don't want to be free. I want to go back upstairs. My parents had no idea what had happened to any of their relatives because there were no communications. But the one thing that they knew is that they had this hope to keep their children safe, and they had succeeded. Their children were safe, and then they don't want it, so it was really tough on them. We went back upstairs. I don't think we even played. We just stood there holding hands and were so scared, didn't want to move. And my parents explained some more, and then a couple of days later, we went out for a walk. Again, we didn't really want to, but whatever our parents said to do, we did. So, again, it was a beautiful spring day. I told you that the years of occupation had been really tough on all Dutch people. Everybody was happy that we were free. But everybody's walking around in raggedy clothes because there were no more clothes you could buy in the stores. Everything that they could take, the Nazis had taken to Germany. So nobody had good clothes. Children all had clothes on that were too small. Some of the shoes, if you have outgrown your shoes, parents had cut off the noses of the shoes, so toes were sticking out, but they were still at least walking on soles. We had cotton booties that Mama Selma made for us because my brother and I also didn't have shoes. And everybody is happy and talking around, and we are scared to death and holding on to each other. The Canadian soldiers that had liberated us wanted to know what Dutch people were like, so they were really walking around in Amsterdam and mingling with all of us. So here are 2 crying kids, and there was one of the soldiers that came up to us and talked to us. My brother and I had no idea what they were actually saying because we did not speak English, but they pulled Hershey bars out of their pockets, and my mom said we could actually take a bite. So the first time we tasted chocolate. I don't know if you remember when you did that, but it was unbelievable. We loved it. Couldn't finish the whole bar because our stomachs were so small, so we had to take the rest of it home. The next morning, we wake up, my brother jumps from his mattress that he had been sleeping on for almost 3 years, and he screams, can we go outside again? So my parents are thinking, these wimpy kids crying all the time, now they want to go back outside. Sure, he wanted more Hershey bars. So children learn fast. So we could read, but we didn't really know how to socialize with other people. And for that reason, as soon as my parents could, we moved into the country. And my mom rented a room where she could share kitchen facilities, and we shared a bathroom. But she also put us in school. My brother, 1st grade, and I, something equivalent to kindergarten. And that was the Montessori system, where everybody is not always on the same page. Everybody is treated as an individual, so we could read, but we didn't do other things well. By the time you're finished 6th grade, everybody's on the same page. So that was really good for us. There were a couple of big decisions that my parents made. First, they were never going to talk about our years of occupation, and that we had a different upbringing for the first years of our lives. They were never going to talk about all the relatives that were murdered. Only my dad's parents survived. The rest of the relatives did not. They were deported to 2 death camps in Poland. One was Sobibor, that was early, and later on to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. So they were not going to talk about it. And they found that out like a couple of months after liberation. And in the beginning, of course, we didn't know. We had one set of grandparents, and we thought that was perfectly normal just to have those grandparents. They were never going to have anything to do with religion. They're not going to join a synagogue. We were not going to do any of the Jewish holidays because religion, in their eyes, was dangerous. And all their lives, they thought about keeping their children safe. And they thought anything with religion, it's too dangerous. That's not keeping our children safe. The whole country, for the first 10 years approximately after liberation, hated Germans, German products, the language, the country, and everybody freely talked about the hatred. But nobody talked about the 5 years of occupation. People didn't want to. I'm not just talking about Jewish people. Nobody in Holland wanted to talk about it because the country had to be rebuilt. Agriculture, dairy, they had slaughtered some of the animals to have something to eat during the war. So everything had to be rebuilt, but also economy. Machinery had to be imported, factories had to be run, stores had to be filled. And it took about 8 years. We were liberated in 1945, and in 1953 the country became prosperous again. It took that long to rebuild the country, and it's a very small country. So nobody really wanted to talk about what happened. People said, it's over, we can't think about it, we can't dwell on it, we need to rebuild. You probably all heard of Anne Frank's diary, or you've read it, or you know somebody who's read it. And Anne Frank was hidden in Amsterdam in an attic, approximately 5 blocks from where we were hidden. When you're in hiding, you never come out, so I never met her. And I'm the lucky one. You know that she was betrayed and eventually died in one of the camps from typhus. And I'm the really lucky one who made it. Otto Frank, the father of Anne Frank, was the only one in their family that survived. When he came back to Holland, the person that had helped them while they were in hiding had found Anne Frank's diary and a lot of loose papers with her writing on it and gave it to Otto Frank. Otto Frank was urged by some people to publish his daughter's diary. And he did. At that time, most people in Holland were angry that he did it. First of all, it's his daughter's inner thoughts. And who wants to know about occupation? We have to rebuild the country. And we were actually not allowed to read it. Much later, I realized how important it was that the diary was published, because it was probably the first publication about the Holocaust. People did a lot of writing afterwards, and today there are a lot of survivors that want people to know what happened, because we're all afraid that people are going to forget. So people are writing today, but at that time, nobody talked about it and nobody wrote, except Anne Frank's diary came out. What opened up the Holocaust, especially in the United States, people really didn't believe it happened. There was a handful of people that knew what had happened. For the rest, people lived their lives. I think the food was restricted because of the large army that was in the Pacific and in Europe, but people really didn't have a war here. So Anne Frank opened that up, and I think that is very important because people need to know what happened. You hope that if you know what really happened, you're going to help prevent it from happening again. And it's kind of a different sentence, and I'll explain it. It was so horrendous what happened during the Holocaust, approximately 12 million people were murdered by the Nazis. Out of those 12 million were 6 million Jews. And out of those 6 million Jews were 1.5 million innocent Jewish children. Murdering somebody is terrible. Killing somebody is terrible. But I'm talking also about innocent people, innocent children who had never had done anything wrong in their lives. All because that's what the Nazis wanted to do. They instilled so much hate. It all started with that little word, four-letter word, hate. Instilled in 6 years so much hatred against these targeted groups in Germany. Their propaganda was so amazing that they brainwashed the whole nation. So people were indifferent. There were people that killed people, and there were people indifferent that it actually happened. So when you learn that, you think by yourself that should never happen again. But it never stopped. We were liberated in 1945. In the late 1970s, there was genocide in Cambodia. 1992, Bosnia. 1994, Rwanda. In the 21st century, so many countries in Africa. And look what is happening today in the Middle East. People are being murdered because they're different. Have a different religion, different color of their skin. They speak differently, they look differently, and that's why they're murdered, not because they're bad people. We cannot let that continue, and that's why it's so important, and I'm so happy that you all came to listen. My story is so little, it's just a little part of the puzzle, but it's so important to all of us that maybe one day it will stop, and it can only stop if everybody does something about it. We have this saying at our Holocaust Museum, never again. But when you think about it, what does that really mean? Never again can only happen if everybody helps that it will never happen again. So how much longer can actually survivors speak? I'm one of the younger ones, so how many more years do we have? So we need all of your help. You've heard from me, tiny little story. If somebody comes up to you and said it didn't happen, you can tell them, yeah, no, it did happen. I saw somebody who was there. I heard somebody speak about it when she was there. It's important that you are informed in what is happening in the world and you speak up against it. And you never have to do it alone. You can talk to your friends, you can talk to your teachers, you can talk to your principal, you can talk to your parents. Do it as a group. We have an incredible country. We have a lot of freedom. We have freedom of choice. But with freedom of choice come responsibilities, in my point of view. You're all close to being 18, or you're already 18. One of our responsibilities is to vote. Don't think my vote doesn't matter. And then vote, study, who can I vote for? Who can make this a better life? I don't care what party it is, but it needs to be the right person, because we need to make this a better world. I think I spoke for a very long time, and you've all been so wonderful, but I'm hoping that you have some questions, because like I said, I had to pick and choose. There's a lot of other things that you might want to know. So please, if you have questions, I think that they want you to make it easier, to line up kind of, and then there's a microphone here so I can hear your question and I can answer it. Every question is a good question. And thank you very much for being so wonderful. One person starts, that's all it takes. Very good. Thank you.
In America, you see a lot of hatred amongst, the left and the right, a lot of polarization. You see a lot of split ends. You see a lot of, people at each other's throats. Would there be any sort of political or controversial statement? And witnessing this hatred and experiencing pretty much the most hate-filled moment in history, how does this make you react?
Hatred makes me really sad. But all of us don't have to accept it. If somebody tells you that a certain group of people are bad, look into it. And you'll find out that they really are not bad, and maybe they need help, or they need to be defended. And when people start doing that, maybe the hatred will go away. And that's really our goal, and it's our hope. And especially today, we have the social media, and we have television, and we have different channels, and I always have the feeling that one group is setting up against the other group. Don't participate. Don't only look at it from one side, but look at it from all sides. Make up your mind. If it's a bad person, it's important that you go to the police and tell the police that it's a bad person. But if it's not a bad person, tell your friends, we need to help that person because it's not bad. And if you do that on a very small scale, it becomes bigger and bigger, and the hope is that everybody will participate. Don't right away believe everything that you hear and that you see. Study it. And that's maybe why our website is so important. Oops. Because we address a lot of it. To give you an example, we had the horrors that happened in Charlottesville. It's about less than a year ago. It's important that you look into what started that. And if you don't agree with it, speak up. Talk to your friends and say, we cannot let that happen again. Or we should not let that happen again. And speak up and do something about it. If you just read it and you put it away, then nothing will ever happen. We really need everybody to know what's going on. So our museum, when that thing happened in Charlottesville and killing, they put something on the website, then pull in history. What can happen if you condone that? And I think we all need to learn that, because once you know that, you'll speak up against it. And that's really important. That's a good question. I don't have all the answers, but this is as far as I think that what you can do. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to know if you've ever had the chance to meet someone from the resistance.
Meet people from the resistance? Yes, some people from the resistance that helped us didn't make it because they were betrayed by collaborators. So they were actually killed in a concentration camp. But some of them that helped us stayed friends, except they're not alive anymore because they would have been well over 100. But we stayed friends with them. In Holland, and anybody that was in the resistance, in no matter what country, can be honored by a memorial in Israel, or can be honored with a statue in their city or their country, in their country. But the people in Holland, when we wanted to do something special for them, they actually said, this is what you do for another human being. That's normal, and we're not anything special, and we don't want anything. But they were really, really, really special people. Yeah. Thank you.
I would like to know.
Hold on, I didn't hear it, yes?
I would like to know why after the war you chose physical therapy.
You need to, you spoke so fast that I didn't get what you,
I would like to know, after the war, why you chose physical therapy of all things to continue.
okay. So my parents, after the liberation, had 2 children. Since only my father's parents survived, they decided we want a large family. So there were 3 more children that they had. So I had 3 more siblings after the war. I was different than most of them. I was the oldest girl. And first of all, I wanted religion. But my parents, they were very afraid when I said to them when I was 15 that I wanted religion. I did it anyway, so they let me make my own choice. But they thought, what I already explained before, that it was dangerous. I also felt that it was necessary at the time that we were liberated and growing up, there were a lot of handicapped children because polio was rampant, there were very few vaccinations, and there was not the right medicine. So we had a lot of children's hospitals and sanitaria where children were for years, and it always touched me. So when I was about 15 in summer vacation, I worked in some of those hospitals. And that was a time when a child had polio and couldn't walk. The braces that you had to put on them were leather and iron, and you had to lace them in. You actually hurt your hands doing it. And then those braces were heavier than the kids actually were. So I thought I really wanted to do something for them. And that's why I went into physical therapy, and then I specialized in children with cerebral palsy and polio. And I worked with that for many years.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Hi.
Did you ever get to meet like some well-known World War II veterans?
World War II veterans?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Our heroes also, because they were our liberators. My husband was in the military, and in the last 6 years that he was on active duty, we were stationed on West Point. And every year around Liberation Day, we had huge groups of World War II veterans that came to West Point. And I always visited with them, and it was a really special group. You know, World War II veterans in general never spoke to their families, just like my parents and people in Holland didn't want to talk about our occupation. What they saw when they went into the camps or went into different countries was so difficult for them to digest. It was so horrendous, they didn't want to bring that home. So they talked to each other when they had their reunions, but they didn't talk to their families. So now, of course, they're all in a generation that there are very few that are left alive because they would have been really old. And their children or grandchildren are finding all kinds of souvenirs that they brought back from the time that they were stationed in Europe. We didn't have all the security that we have now to take things back. You know, you could bring things over the border, you could bring pistols and weapons and whatever. And they took a lot of what they called souvenirs back, and the kids are finding that in attics and basements. And we're learning things. There are some soldiers that brought photo albums that they found, Nazi photo albums. And some of the children contact the Holocaust Museum and donate it or have copies made. And we find out all kinds of things that we didn't know. We didn't know that Nazi A met Nazi B, but all of a sudden we see a picture and they're together in a picture. So now we know that they actually met. So we're learning a lot from what we find from the veterans. And they were all really special people, very close-knit group. And of course they were our liberators, so they're my heroes. Yeah. Hi.
Whenever you were in school and like as you were getting older, did the other kids know you were a Holocaust like survivor, and like did they treat you any differently because of it?
No, nobody talked about it. We had a Jewish war orphanage on the edge of our town when we lived in the country. So we had 3 war orphans in my class. Nobody talked about it. They were just classmates. Later on, I realized, when I read more about it, that they had lost their parents. Nobody talked about it. Nobody was special. We had all had 5 years of occupation, and we just had to move on. It all came later. And then in Holland, we were actually not considered survivors. The only people that were survivors were people that had survived the camps and returned, a small handful of people. Those were the survivors. Till the Holocaust Museum opened, and they had a special definition of who's a survivor. When I started volunteering, they said to me, "Do you know that you're a survivor?" Okay. I didn't know. So no, nobody made a big deal out of it. Okay.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time, but before we do, Mrs. Lawrence, Israel's and team, thank you so much for sharing your story of everything that happened. And guys, how about another round of applause?
Thank you.